Simple syrup is simple. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It's simply a combination of sugar and water. And the only thing that's important in the recipe is the ratio these are mixed at. And there are different ratios for different applications depending on whether you're cooking, making cocktails, or doing soda fountain drinks, and a couple other things. So I'm going to give you 5 different ratios and where they work best in what applications. One-to-one simple syrup. That's the most common. What you get is 1 part sugar and an equal part of water. Now, does it matter whether it's cups or weighed out? You can use a balance for this if you want, but it doesn't really matter. Generally, most people use cups. Use any type of measuring cup that you need. But basically, you just want to measure out 1 cup of water and 1 cup of sugar. Put in a pot. Dissolve. You probably don't even need heat for that one. Now the important part about it is that at this ratio, the weight to volume of sugar is 66–67%, and that has enough sugar in it, it becomes antimicrobial. Now the point of that is that means there's going to be no bacteria growing in it, and fungus may grow around the edge of the bottle at the top. Sometimes you'll see that in the neck. That's a different issue. But the idea is that with this mixture of 1-to-1, you will not get bacteria, and it will store at room temperature for months. It does not present any possibility of contamination. And that's because there's enough sugar in there that it will dehydrate the bacteria through osmosis, because the concentration of sugar is so high outside of the bacteria, it will pull water from them. So that's basically why 1-to-1 is so important and so common. One of the benefits of using it is it's very easy to mix. You'll find it more in cooking because, for example, if you need to soak a cake, it's going to help you keep the cake moist. And obviously it won't be too sweet because as we get into the next one, 2-to-1 simple syrup is much thicker, less water, and a little bit less easy to handle. So if you're doing cooking, or soda fountain stuff, because mixing is really important, the 1-to-1 is the way to go. However, if you're doing cocktails and a couple other things, we'll talk about that next. 2-to-1 simple syrup. You're basically just adding an equal amount of sugar to the 1-to-1. So you're going to have 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. The reason this one is very common is this is the most amount of sugar you're going to be able to dissolve in this amount of water. So whether it's 2 cups of sugar or you weigh out, 1,000 grams into 500 mils of water, that's the maximum amount of sugar you can dissolve in water at room temperature. Now, that has some benefits. For example, if you're bartending, 2-to-1 simple syrup is going to last twice as long as 1-to-1 simple syrup, so you're going to have to make less of it. Some of the downsides are that if you put it in the refrigerator, it may crystallize out. It will also, on the rim of your bottle, you're often going to get crystallization of that sugar, and that can seize the top of your bottle, which can sometimes be a pain to break apart. Sometimes you have to soak it in water. So those are the only downsides. And the last one would be, the last downside is that sometimes it's a little bit too thick to mix. So if you're cooking with it, sometimes it's just too thick for moistening something. But if you're actually just mixing it into something like you would sugar pre-dissolved, then it's fine. In cocktails, it can often become a little bit thick at the bottom of the cocktail if you put ice in it. because it gets close to the freezing point of water and then it thickens up. So you'll have stratification in your drink where it's really sweet on the bottom and not so sweet on top. If you shake cocktails, it's not an issue at all. But if you stir them, give them a good stir and it will be fine. But this is the most common one. It seems to work for most applications. However, there are a couple more interesting ones we're going to talk about. So let's USP simple syrup, as in United States Pharmacopoeia. So simple syrup has been around for a long time, back in the 1800s. It's basically been around since sugar, and it was realized that sugar helped the medicine go down. So when they originally came up with simple syrup, at least through the pharmacies, the idea was that they wanted to make it as concentrated as possible without any issues of crystallization, because that would change the formula. And then that wouldn't provide consistency. And one thing about pharmacists and medicine is you want to be consistent, even in taste. So they created it to have 14 pounds per gallon, which works out to 1,672 grams per liter, which is kind of a 5-to-3 ratio. Now there's a very specific reason they did that. It's because it's slightly below 2-to-1. And so there's a little bit of extra water in there, which allows it not to crystallize. So it's set for the maximum, or close to the maximum, amount of sugar that will dissolve in water at 0 degrees Celsius. So back then in the 1800s, and especially at soda fountains and stuff, you know, they didn't always have heat, or the heat may not be reliable, so there's a chance that things would freeze. So you didn't want your simple syrup freezing, because then that would cause dropout and crystallization, again, making the bottle not standard. So the idea was that if you made something that wouldn't freeze at 0 degrees Celsius, then you're good. 0 degrees Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit. So that one exists. That one was pretty common early on in the soda fountain history. Never really common anywhere else. But if you work in a pharmacy or pharmaceutical place, you're looking at 5 parts sugar to 3 parts water. Soda fountain. Now this one used 3-to-2 simple syrup, or at least that's what was published in a lot of books. Now 3-to-2 is slightly thinner than 2-to-1. It doesn't have the issues with freezing or crystallization, and it mixes better. And the reason you'd want mixability is that in the old days, they'd basically put the syrup in the bottom of the glass and use a soda draft arm to put the soda into the drink. And that action of squirting the soda into the drink caused the mixing. So if your simple syrup was too thick, it wouldn't mix very well. So you'd get that stratification in the drink where it's sweet on the bottom and bland on top. So reducing the viscosity of the simple syrup slightly helped with the mixability. Now, most people aren't going to use that, but if you do find that 2-to-1's not working for you in the mixability department, 3-to-2 might be an option. The last ratio that we're going to talk about is 4 parts to 3 parts sugar to water. And the reason we're going to talk about that one is that if you ever have to do nutritional stuff, or you actually want to know how many calories are in your drink, 4 parts sugar and 3 parts water actually makes 1 teaspoon of simple syrup equal 1 teaspoon of sugar. So from that point, you can actually calculate quite easily how much sugar you're putting into a drink. Now, if I asked you what's 2-to-1 or 1-to-1, most people wouldn't know how much sugar is going in because you're going to have to calculate it. And the problem with calculating that is that if you add, a pound of sugar to a pound of water, you'll end up with 2 pounds of something, but the volume is going to be different. So you're not going to know exactly how much simple syrup has, or how much sugar is in a certain volume of simple syrup without calculating, and that requires a little bit more effort. So when I went to look at this a long time ago, I decided that if I was going to make a simple syrup, 1 teaspoon equaling 1 teaspoon of sugar was the way to go, because then you know what you're putting in it. So back in 2004, The first article I ever published on drinks was on simple syrup, and it was in the Journal of American Mixology. And it was a multi-page, in-depth exploration of simple syrup and the different ways you could use it and how bartenders used it, and whether more water in the simple syrup, as in 1-to-1, affected the drinks compared to 2-to-1, and historically what did they use and the types of sugar. And it really boils down to white sugar in various ratios for various applications. So this is one of those videos that I've been meaning to make for a long time, just because, for me, this journey on cocktails and everything drink and art of drink all started with that first article on talking about simple syrup.